The scratches, carved deep into the midnight blue paint, looked like angry scars against the fluorescent parking garage lights. Maya Chen stood frozen beside her Honda Civic, her work badge still clipped to her navy scrubs, the smell of hospital antiseptic clinging to her hair. The word bitch stretched across her passenger door in jagged letters, each stroke deliberate, vicious. Below it, smaller but no less cruel, know your place. Her hands trembled as she traced the air above the damage, afraid to touch what someone had done to her first car, bought with 3 years of saved nursing shifts and weekend overtime. The metallic taste of shock filled her mouth as she noticed the slashed front tire, rubber peeling away like a grotesque smile. "Maya? Oh, honey, what happened?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Patterson, the 70-year-old security guard who worked the night shift in the medical center's parking structure. Her weathered face creased with concern as she approached, her flashlight beam dancing across the vandalized vehicle. "I don't know," Maya whispered, though even as the words left her lips, a cold certainty was settling in her stomach like a stone. The handwriting looked familiar, those sharp, angular letters she'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists for 26 years. "I just finished my shift, came down to go home, and—" Mrs. Patterson's radio crackled to life, a dispatcher's voice cutting through the underground silence. The older woman adjusted the volume, then placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "We need to call the police, sweetheart. This is vandalism, pure and simple. Criminal damage to property." Maya nodded, though her mind was already racing ahead to family dinners, to her mother's voice saying, "Keep the peace," and her Aunt Vivian's sharp laugh echoing in the kitchen of her childhood home. The same aunt who had cornered her at last month's family barbecue, wine-flushed and bitter, spitting words about Maya thinking she was better than everyone else just because she'd finished nursing school. The parking garage felt colder now, the concrete walls pressing in like the sides of a tomb. Other cars sat undisturbed in their spaces, a Mercedes, a lifted truck, an old Toyota with a faded bumper sticker. Only hers had been chosen, singled out for this particular brand of hatred. "The cameras!" Mrs. Patterson said suddenly, following Maya's gaze upward to where a camera hung from the ceiling, its red light blinking steadily. "The cameras see everything down here, every level, every entrance. We'll know who did this." Maya felt something shift in her chest, a spark of hope mixing with the dread. Evidence, proof, something more solid than the sick feeling in her gut and the terrible familiarity of that handwriting. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers, taking photos of the damage from every angle, the camera flash throwing harsh shadows across the violated paint. The hospital loomed above them, 16 floors of windows glowing with the soft light of healing and hope. Maya had spent 4 years learning to mend what was broken, to ease pain, to restore wholeness. She'd never imagined she'd need those skills for herself, for wounds that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with blood. The kind that connected families and sometimes poisoned them. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boyfriend, James. "Movie night? Got your favorite takeout from Chen's garden." The normality of it, the sweet mundane gesture, made the parking garage scene feel even more surreal. She wanted to be curled up on his couch, arguing about what to watch, stealing spring rolls from his container. Instead, she was standing in a concrete cavern, staring at evidence of someone's hatred, carved into metal and rubber. "My aunt," she said quietly, the words falling like stones into the silence. "What's that, honey?" Mrs. Patterson looked up from her radio. "I think it was my aunt, Vivian Chen. This looks like her handwriting." The admission felt like swallowing glass, each word cutting her throat on the way out. Family didn't do this to family. Except when they did.
The security guard's expression hardened. "Family or not, this is a crime.
You don't get to destroy someone's property just because you share DNA. She keyed her radio again. Base, this is Patterson and Medical Center Parking Level B. Need a police unit for vandalism. Also requesting access to the security footage for review. Maya's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from her mother. Linda Chen's name glowed on the screen, accompanied by a photo of her at Maya's nursing school graduation, pride shining in her dark eyes. Maya let it go to voicemail, unable to face the conversation that would inevitably follow. Her mother, the eternal peacekeeper, would find a way to blame Maya for provoking Vivian, would insist that family harmony mattered more than property damage. The police arrived 20 minutes later, 2 officers who took the report with professional efficiency. Officer Rodriguez, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, examined the damage while his partner interviewed Mrs. Patterson about the security systems. Maya found herself repeating the story, finishing her shift, walking to her car, discovering the destruction. She mentioned her suspicions about her aunt, watching Rodriguez's expression remain neutral as he took notes. "We'll need to review the security footage," he said, clicking his pen closed. "The property manager will need to authorize access, but given the nature of the crime, that shouldn't be a problem. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? Family you can call." The irony wasn't lost on her. "My boyfriend," she said. "I can stay with my boyfriend." As the officers completed their paperwork, Maya found herself staring at the camera again, that steady red light that had witnessed whatever happened here. Somewhere in its digital memory was the truth, stored in pixels and timestamps. The thought should have been comforting, but instead it filled her with a strange dread. Some truths, once revealed, changed everything that came after. Mrs. Patterson stayed with her until the tow truck arrived to take the damaged Honda to a repair shop. The older woman pressed a business card into Maya's hand. Her grandson's auto body shop, she explained, where they'd take good care of both the car and the bill. 27 years I've worked security, seen a lot of angry people, a lot of stupid decisions, but there's something different about family violence. It cuts deeper because it comes from where you least expect it. Maya nodded, clutching her purse and a canvas bag full of medical journals. The parking garage felt emptier now, more dangerous, as if the violation of her car had somehow infected the entire space. She would never feel safe here again, would always be looking over her shoulder, checking for fresh damage, new threats. The Uber ride to James's apartment passed in a blur of city lights and radio music that seemed to mock the chaos in her head. She kept replaying the last family gathering, searching for clues she'd missed. Vivian had been drinking more than usual, her complaints about Maya's fancy education and uppity attitude sharper than before. There had been a moment late in the evening when Maya had corrected something Vivian said about vaccines. A gentle correction, she had thought, just sharing accurate medical information. But Vivian's eyes had flashed with something darker than embarrassment, something that looked like hatred. The word bitch echoed in Maya's mind as the Uber pulled up to James's apartment. Tomorrow, she would have to call her insurance company, deal with repair estimates, probably miss work while she sorted out transportation. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to pursue charges against her own aunt, whether to shatter the fragile peace her family had built around years of overlooking Vivian's increasingly erratic behavior. But tonight, as she climbed the stairs to James's third-floor apartment, she carried with her the image of that blinking red light. Somewhere in the digital archives of the medical center's security system, the truth was waiting. The camera didn't lie, didn't make excuses, didn't prioritize family harmony over justice. The camera had seen everything. And soon, Maya would too.
Maya had always been the good daughter, the one who called every Sunday and remembered birthdays and never missed family dinners. Even when Aunt Vivian made cutting remarks about her putting on airs or Uncle Frank drank too much and got political, Maya smiled and helped clear the dishes and kept the peace. It was her role in the Chen family ecosystem, the mediator, the achiever, the one who made everyone else feel better about their choices by never complaining about her own struggles. James found her that night curled on his couch, still in her scrubs, staring at her phone where 17 missed calls from various family members glowed accusingly. The takeout containers sat untouched on the coffee table, growing cold while Maya tried to process what had happened. "The security footage will be ready tomorrow," she said, without looking up, her voice hollow. "Mrs. Patterson called. They're treating it as a priority because it happened on hospital property." James settled beside her, careful not to crowd her space. He'd learned her rhythms over their 2 years together, knew when she needed comfort and when she needed room to think. What will you do if it really was Vivian? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Maya cooled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. "I don't know. I should know, shouldn't I? I'm 26 years old. I save lives for a living. I should be able to figure out what to do when someone vandalizes my car." But the truth was more complicated than damage to metal and rubber. The truth was that Maya had spent her entire life learning to absorb other people's anger, to smooth over conflicts, to be the emotional shock absorber for a family that seemed to specialize in disappointment and resentment. Her parents had divorced when she was 12, and somehow it became Maya's job to maintain relationships with both sides, to carry messages and manage expectations, and never, ever rock the boat. Nursing school had been her rebellion, though no one recognized it as such. While her cousins drifted through dead-end jobs and her siblings struggled with addiction and unemployment, Maya studied anatomy and pharmacology and the delicate art of caring for strangers. She worked weekends at a coffee shop to pay for textbooks, slept 4 hours a night, and graduated summa cum laude with a job offer from the best hospital in the city. Her family had been proud, at least initially. Her mother cried at graduation, her father awkwardly hugged her, and even Aunt Vivian managed some stiff congratulations. But as the months passed and Maya settled into her career, something soured. Her success began to feel like an accusation to the rest of them, her stability a reproach to their chaos. "Remember when you used to be fun?" Vivian had said at Maya's cousin Derek's birthday party 6 months ago, "before you got all serious and medical." She'd laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Now you're too good for us regular people." Maya had tried to laugh it off, had insisted she was still the same person, still family, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. She had changed. Education changed you. Exposure to different worlds changed you. Success changed you. She couldn't unsee what she'd learned about health and science and the wider world. She couldn't pretend that some of her family's beliefs weren't harmful, couldn't nod along when Uncle Frank spouted conspiracy theories or when Vivian made racist comments about her coworkers. The divide had widened gradually, imperceptibly, like a crack in a foundation that you don't notice until the house starts to settle. Maya found herself dreading family gatherings, making excuses to leave early, screening calls from relatives who wanted to share some piece of misinformation they'd seen on social media. She loved them, but she couldn't be the person they wanted her to be anymore. Compliant, uncritical, willing to prioritize family loyalty over her own values. James reached for her hand, his fingers warm and steady. "You know this isn't about the car, right?" Maya nodded, though the acknowledgement hurt. "It's about me changing, about me not staying in the box they built for me." She thought about the last family dinner she'd attended, how Vivian had spent 20 minutes ranting about liberal nurses pushing vaccines on innocent children. Maya had tried to stay quiet, but when Vivian started talking about autism and mercury, something in her had snapped.
"That's not how vaccines work," she'd said, her voice calm but firm. "I understand your concerns, but the science is really clear on this. I can send you some peer-reviewed studies if you'd like to read more about it." The table had gone silent. Her mother's face had flushed with embarrassment, her father had suddenly found his napkin fascinating, and Vivian had stared at Maya with naked hostility. "Oh, excuse me," Vivian had said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I forgot we had a medical expert at the table. Please, enlighten us, poor ignorant peasants, with your superior knowledge." Maya had tried to backtrack, to soften her approach, but the damage was done. She'd committed the cardinal family sin. She'd made someone feel stupid. For the rest of the evening, Vivian had made pointed comments about Maya's fancy education and how some people thought a college degree made them better than everyone else. That night, Maya had driven home in tears, calling James from her car to vent about the impossible position she was in. She couldn't pretend to believe things she knew were false, but speaking up made her the villain. There was no winning move in a game where intellectual honesty was seen as arrogance and professional expertise was treated as betrayal. I used to think family was supposed to support each other, Maya said, leaning into James's warmth. But sometimes it feels like they only support the version of me that makes them comfortable. Her phone buzzed again, another missed call from her mother. Maya declined it, knowing that Linda would be in full damage control mode, already crafting explanations and excuses. Her mother had perfected the art of explaining away other people's bad behavior, of finding reasons why everyone else needed to adjust their expectations, rather than holding people accountable for their actions. Maybe she was having a bad day, Linda would say about Vivian. You know she's been struggling since the divorce, and you can be a little intense sometimes, honey. Maybe try to be more understanding. Maya had heard variations of this speech her entire life. When her father's drinking made holidays tense, Maya was told to be more patient. When her brother stole money from her piggy bank, she was encouraged to be more forgiving. When Uncle Frank made inappropriate comments at her high school graduation party, she was advised to avoid him rather than anyone addressing his behavior. The pattern was always the same. Maya was expected to absorb other people's dysfunction, to modify her own behavior to accommodate their worst impulses, to shrink herself to make room for their chaos. And for years she had done it, because keeping the peace felt more important than protecting herself. But now, staring at the photos of her vandalized car on her phone, Maya felt something shifting inside her. This wasn't about patience or understanding or keeping the peace. This was about someone deliberately trying to hurt her, to punish her for the crime of growing and changing and refusing to stay small. "I'm tired," she said, suddenly, the words coming from some deep, honest place she rarely accessed. "I'm tired of being the one who always has to adjust, who always has to understand, who always has to forgive. I'm tired of making myself smaller so everyone else can feel bigger." James squeezed her hand. "You don't have to do that anymore. You get to decide what you'll accept and what you won't." The radical simplicity of it hit her like a revelation. She had choices. She could choose to press charges or not, to attend family gatherings or not, to accept blame for other people's actions or not. The familiar guilt rose immediately. Who was she to upset the family dynamic, to cause problems, to put her own needs first? But underneath it was something new. Anger. Clean, righteous anger at being asked to set herself on fire to keep other people warm. Maya's career had taught her to advocate for her patients, to speak up when something wasn't right, to prioritize health and safety over comfort and convenience. Maybe it was time to
Those same skills to her own life. Maybe it was time to stop being the family's emotional punching bag and start being her own advocate. The takeout food had grown cold, but James heated it up anyway, and they ate in comfortable silence while Maya's mind raced through possibilities and consequences. Tomorrow, she would see the security footage. Tomorrow, she would know for certain who had violated her property and her sense of safety. Tomorrow, she would have to decide what justice looked like when it meant holding family accountable. But tonight, wrapped in James's patient warmth, Maya allowed herself to imagine a different kind of family dynamic, one where her success was celebrated rather than resented, where her knowledge was valued rather than seen as a threat,
where she could be fully herself without having to apologize for taking up space. It felt dangerous and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and contemplating flight. The security footage was crystal clear. Maya sat in the medical center's security office the next morning, watching 12 minutes and 37 seconds that would change everything. Mrs. Patterson had arranged for her to view the recording with Detective Sarah Wong from the Property Crimes Unit, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who specialized in vandalism cases. On the grainy black and white monitor, Aunt Vivian appeared at 11:43 p.m., walking purposefully through the parking garage with a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She moved like someone who belonged there, confident and unhurried, pausing only when she reached Maya's Honda Civic. The timestamp showed her circling the car once, twice, before setting down her bag and withdrawing something that glinted in the fluorescent light. Keys, Detective Wong said quietly, making notes on her pad. She's using keys to scratch the paint. Maya watched in sick fascination as her 52-year-old aunt methodically carved letters into the passenger door, her movements deliberate and precise. There was no heat of passion here, no sudden explosion of anger. This was planned, calculated, personal. The camera captured everything. Vivian pulling out a knife to slash the tire, Vivian pausing to examine her work, Vivian walking away with the same purposeful stride. The entire incident took less than 13 minutes, but those 13 minutes contained enough evidence to file criminal charges that could send her to jail. "I need you to formally identify the suspect," Detective Wong said, though Maya's sick expression probably told her everything she needed to know. "That's my aunt, Vivian Chen, my father's sister." The words tasted like ash. "She's family." Detective Wong's expression didn't change. Family doesn't make it legal. If anything, this makes it worse. She knew exactly whose car she was destroying. This wasn't random vandalism. This was targeted harassment. Maya's phone had been buzzing all morning with calls from relatives who had somehow gotten wind of the situation. Her mother, her father, her Uncle Frank, cousin Derek, even her younger sister Emma, who lived in Portland. The Chen family grapevine was faster than the internet, and everyone had opinions about what Maya should do. "Let it go," her mother had pleaded during their morning conversation. "Vivian's been struggling since her divorce. She lost her job last month, she's drinking too much, she's not thinking clearly. Pressing charges will destroy her life." "What about my life?" Maya had asked, but Linda had already moved on to suggesting family mediation, counseling, anything except holding Vivian accountable for her actions. Her father had been even more direct. "Don't air our dirty laundry in public. Handle this within the family. That's how we've always done things." But Emma, bless her, had been different. "Are you kidding me?" she said when Maya called to explain the situation. "She vandalized your car and wrote bitch on it. And everyone wants you to just, what, pretend it didn't happen? Maya, that's insane." Detective Wong handed Maya a form to sign, authorizing the police to pursue the case. Her hand hovered over the signature line while her phone buzzed again. Uncle Frank this time, probably calling to add his voice to the chorus of family members demanding Maya sacrifice her own sense of justice for the sake of peace. "Take your time," Detective Wong said, though her tone suggested that hesitation in cases like this usually meant the victim would back down. "But I should tell you, this kind of behavior often escalates. People who feel entitled to destroy your property today might feel entitled to do worse tomorrow." The warning sent a chill through Maya's chest. She thought about Vivian's increasing hostility over the past year, the way her comments had grown sharper and more personal. The divorce, the job loss. Maya hadn't known about either of those developments. Her family specialized in keeping secrets, in presenting a unified front to the world while chaos simmered beneath the surface. Maya signed the form. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within hours of the police issuing a warrant for Vivian's arrest, Maya's phone exploded with angry calls and texts. Her father accused her of throwing family under the bus. Her mother cried and begged her to reconsider. Cousins she hadn't heard from in months emerged from the woodwork to tell her she was being vindictive and cruel. The most painful call came from her paternal grandmother, Nai, whose 87-year-old voice shook with disappointment. "Maya, how could you do this to your aunt? She made a mistake. Family forgives mistakes. She committed a crime, Nai. She destroyed my property and wrote hateful things about me. That's not a mistake. That's deliberate." But Nai's worldview came from a different era, a different cultural context where family loyalty trumped individual rights, where keeping face mattered more than seeking justice. "You have brought shame on our family," she said, before hanging up. Maya sat in her empty apartment. She'd taken the day off work to deal with the police reports and insurance claims, feeling like she was drowning in guilt and confusion. Every instinct she'd been raised with told her to back down, to drop the charges, to be the bigger person. But every principle she'd developed as an adult told her that what Vivian had done was wrong and deserved consequences. Her phone rang again, and this time it was Derek, her cousin and Vivian's son. Maya hesitated before answering, knowing this conversation would be the hardest yet. "Derek, please." Maya's voice was strained, exhausted. "Mom's been arrested. She's sitting in a cell right now because of you. Whatever problems you two have, this isn't the way to solve them. Derek, she vandalized my car. She wrote bitch on my door and slashed my tire. I have security footage. I know she did it, and it was wrong, okay? But pressing charges, having her arrested, that's not going to fix anything. It's just going to tear our family apart." Maya felt the familiar pressure, the weight of everyone else's expectations crushing down on her shoulders. She was supposed to be the understanding one, the one who absorbed other people's anger and dysfunction without complaint. She was supposed to prioritize family harmony over her own sense of justice and safety. "What would you have me do?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Just pretend it didn't happen? Let her face no consequences for deliberately trying to hurt me? Talk to her. Work it out between yourselves. You're both adults. Surely you can figure out a solution that doesn't involve the police." The suggestion was so absurd that Maya almost laughed. Talk to the person who had spent the better part of a year making increasingly hostile comments about her education and career, who
had culminated this campaign of resentment by vandalizing her property under cover of darkness? What exactly were they supposed to discuss? Vivian's feelings about Maya's success? Maya's feelings about being called a bitch? "She's the one who escalated this beyond family," Maya said. "She's the one who decided to commit a crime. I didn't make that choice for her." But Derek was already deep into damage control mode, the same role Maya had played for years. "She's going through a hard time. The divorce was messy. She lost her job. She's been drinking. You know how proud she is. Asking for help is hard for her. Maybe if you'd reached out, been more supportive." "Stop." The word came out sharper than Maya intended, but she was tired of being blamed for other people's choices. "I am not responsible for Vivian's drinking or her unemployment or her decision to vandalize my car. Those are her problems to solve, not mine to manage." The conversation ended badly, with Derek hanging up after accusing Maya of being cold and selfish. Within an hour, she received a barrage of texts from other family members, all variations on the same theme. Maya was destroying the family over a car. Maya was being petty and vindictive. Maya needed to think about the bigger picture. The bigger picture, apparently, was that Vivian's actions should have no consequences as long as Maya was willing to absorb the damage and everyone could pretend nothing had happened.
That evening, Maya met her best friend Zoe for dinner at a small Thai restaurant near the hospital. Zoe was a social worker who specialized in domestic violence cases, and she listened to Maya's story with growing concern. "You know this is abuse, right?" Zoe said, setting down her chopsticks. "Not just the vandalism, though that's definitely criminal harassment, but the way your family is responding to it. They're gaslighting you into believing that seeking justice makes you the bad guy." Maya stirred her pad thai absently. "It's complicated. Family is—" "No," Zoe interrupted firmly. "Family is not more complicated than criminal law. If a stranger had vandalized your car and written bitch on it, would you hesitate to press charges?" The answer was obvious, and Maya's silence spoke volumes. "The fact that she's related to you makes this worse, not better," Zoe continued. "She knows where you live, where you work, what car you drive. She targeted you specifically because she felt entitled to punish you for what? Getting an education, having a successful career, being proud of your accomplishments?" Maya thought about the security footage, about Vivian's methodical approach to the destruction. There had been something chilling about her aunt's calmness, her complete lack of hesitation. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment or emotional overflow. This was planned, deliberate, personal. "My family thinks I'm overreacting," Maya said quietly. "Your family is protecting an abuser at your expense. They're asking you to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. That's not love, Maya. That's dysfunction." The words hit like a slap, mostly because they rang true. Maya had spent years managing other people's emotions, smoothing over conflicts, accepting blame for problems she didn't create. She'd been so focused on being the good daughter, the peacekeeper, the understanding one, that she forgot she had the right to be angry when someone hurt her. That night, alone in her apartment, Maya made a list of every time a family member had asked her to accept unacceptable behavior in the name of keeping the peace. The list was longer than she had expected, going back to childhood incidents where she'd been told to apologize for other people's actions, to understand their circumstances, to be the bigger person. She was tired of being the bigger person. She was tired of shrinking herself to accommodate other people's dysfunction. She was tired of being told that her boundaries were less important than other people's comfort.
Vivian had been released on her own recognizance pending trial, with a restraining order prohibiting her from contacting Maya or coming within 500 feet of her workplace. The legal machinery was in motion now, beyond Maya's control and beyond her family's ability to manipulate or manage. For the first time in years, Maya felt like she was standing up straight instead of bending herself into the shapes other people demanded. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time, like finally taking a deep breath after years of holding it. The trial was set for 6 weeks later, but the truth began emerging long before Maya set foot in a courtroom. It started with a phone call from Derek, Vivian's son, 3 days after his mother's arrest. His voice was different this time, smaller, ashamed. "Maya, I need to tell you something. About Mom. About what's been happening." Maya was at work, grabbing a quick coffee between patients, but something in Derek's tone made her step into an empty conference room and close the door. "What is it?" She's been talking about you for months. Obsessing, really. Ever since that dinner where you corrected her about vaccines. She started keeping track of everything, your social media posts, when you got promoted at work, when you and James went on vacation. She has this whole narrative about how you think you're better than the rest of us. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, the fluorescent lights too bright. "Derek, what are you saying?" "I'm saying this wasn't a one-time thing. The car was it was the culmination. She's been planning ways to hurt you, to take you down a peg. She said you needed to be reminded of your place in the family." Maya sank into a chair, her coffee growing cold in her hands. "How long have you known about this?" The silence stretched long enough that Maya thought the call had dropped. Finally, Derek's voice came back,
barely a whisper. Months. I've known for months. And I didn't warn you because I hoped she would just get over it. I didn't want to cause drama. The betrayal hit deeper than the vandalism itself. Derek had watched his mother spiral into an obsessive hatred of Maya and had said nothing. He'd prioritized avoiding drama over Maya's safety, had let her walk unknowingly into an increasingly dangerous situation. "She knows your schedule," Derek continued, the words tumbling out now like a confession. "She follows your Instagram stories, knows when you work late shifts, when you park in the garage. Maya, I think she's been watching you." Maya's hands began to shake. The paranoid feeling she'd been having lately, the sense of being observed, suddenly made terrible sense. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because she got arrested and I realized how far this had gone. Because I found things in her apartment, printouts of your social media posts, photos she had taken of your car in different locations, notes about your routines. Maya, she's sick, really sick, and I let it get this far because I was too scared to confront her." The revelation sent Maya reeling. This wasn't just about family resentment or wounded pride. This was stalking, obsessive behavior that could have escalated far beyond property damage. The security footage had shown only one incident, but apparently it was part of a much larger pattern of harassment and surveillance. That evening, Maya called Detective Wong to report the new information. The detective's response was immediate and concerning. "We need to search her apartment," Wong said. "If what your cousin is telling you is true, this is a much more serious case than simple vandalism. Stalking charges carry heavier penalties, and the evidence of premeditation will affect sentencing."
The search of Vivian's apartment yielded a treasure trove of disturbing evidence. Maya was allowed to review the inventory report. Dozens of printed screenshots from Maya's social media accounts, notes tracking her work schedule and daily routines, photos of her car taken from various locations around the city. Most chilling was a notebook filled with Vivian's increasingly unhinged thoughts about Maya's arrogance and betrayal of the family. One entry, dated just 2 weeks before the vandalism, read, "She thinks she's so smart, so much better than us. Someone needs to teach her a lesson. Someone needs to show her that all her fancy education won't protect her from consequences." Detective Wong called Maya at home to discuss the findings. "This changes everything," she said. "We're looking at stalking in the first degree, criminal harassment, possibly terroristic threatening. Your aunt documented months of surveillance and planning. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was sustained, deliberate psychological warfare." Maya felt sick. While she'd been worrying about family dynamics and hurt feelings, Vivian had been conducting a campaign of obsessive surveillance, documenting her movements and planning her attack. The violation went so much deeper than scratched paint and a slashed tire. The family's reaction to these revelations was swift and predictable. Maya's mother called within hours of the police search, her voice shrill with panic. "They're saying terrible things about Vivian, honey, making her sound like some kind of stalker. You know that's not who she is. She's sick. She needs help, not prison." "Mom, she documented months of watching me. She took photos of my car in different places, tracked my work schedule, wrote about wanting to hurt me. How is that not stalking?" "She was going through a hard time. People do strange things when they're depressed. You can't seriously want to send your own aunt to prison for being mentally ill." The familiar pattern emerged immediately. Minimize the behavior, excuse the perpetrator, blame the victim. Linda Chen had perfected the art of reframing abuse as mental illness, criminality as misunderstanding, deliberate harm as unfortunate mistakes. But this time Maya didn't bend. Mental illness doesn't excuse stalking, Mom. Depression doesn't make you track someone's movements and plan ways to hurt them. Vivian made choices, hundreds of deliberate choices to violate my privacy and safety. The conversation ended with Linda hanging up in frustration, but Maya felt something she hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in her adult life, she had refused to absorb someone else's dysfunction, refused to minimize her own experience to make others comfortable.
The revelations continued to unfold over the following weeks. James helped Maya review her social media accounts, tracking when Vivian had liked or commented on posts. The pattern was disturbing. Vivian had been monitoring Maya's online activity obsessively, screenshotting posts about Maya's work achievements, vacation photos, even casual dinner dates. The digital stalking had been going on for over 8 months. Emma flew in from Portland to provide moral support during the trial preparation. She was the only family member who had fully supported Maya's decision to press charges, and her presence felt like a lifeline in the storm of family disapproval. I always thought something was off about Aunt Vivian. The way she talked about you at family gatherings, the weird comments about your job, but I never imagined it was this bad. Maya's phone buzzed with another text from Uncle Frank. "Family meeting tomorrow. We need to discuss this situation before it gets out of hand." Maya deleted the message without responding. She was done attending meetings where her safety was treated as a negotiable topic. The prosecutor assigned to Maya's case was a sharp woman named Rachel Martinez, who specialized in domestic violence and stalking cases. During their pretrial meeting, she laid out the evidence in stark terms.
Your aunt's notebooks show clear escalation in her fixation on you, Martinez explained, spreading photographs of handwritten pages across the conference table. She started with general resentment about your education and career, then moved to specific anger about the vaccine conversation, then began detailed surveillance and planning. This is textbook predatory stalking behavior. Maya stared at photocopies of Vivian's handwriting, pages and pages of bitter observations about Maya's life, detailed notes about her routines, increasingly violent fantasies about teaching her a lesson. One entry made her stomach lurch. Followed her to grocery store today. She has no idea how easy it would be to hurt her. So naive, so trusting. Someone should show her how vulnerable she really is. How long could she go to prison? Maya asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Stalking in the first degree carries up to 5 years. Criminal harassment, vandalism, violation of the restraining order. We're looking at potentially 7 to 10 years total if she's convicted on all counts. The weight of it hit Maya like a physical blow. 10 years of Vivian's life, destroyed because she couldn't handle Maya's success. 10 years that would devastate Derek, would give the family more ammunition to blame Maya for being vindictive and cruel. But then, Martinez showed her the final piece of evidence. Security footage from a grocery store near Maya's apartment, showing Vivian following Maya through the aisles, staying just far enough back to avoid detection. The timestamp was from 2 days before the car vandalism. She was escalating, Martinez said quietly. The property damage was just the beginning. People who engage in this level of surveillance and planning don't usually stop at vandalism. They escalate to direct confrontation, to physical violence. Maya thought about her aunt's note about how easy it would be to hurt her, and suddenly the parking garage incident felt less like the climax of Vivian's campaign and more like the opening move in something much darker. The trial began on a gray Tuesday morning in October. Maya had taken a week off work, unable to concentrate on patient care while reliving months of surveillance and psychological warfare. The courthouse was downtown, an imposing building that made everything feel more real and more final. Her family's absence was notable. Maya's parents had refused to attend, claiming it would be too painful to watch family members testify against each other. Derek was there as a witness for the prosecution, his face pale and drawn. Uncle Frank and several cousins sat in the back rows, their expressions ranging from disappointed to hostile. Only Emma and James sat in Maya's row, their presence a small but vital reminder that she wasn't completely alone. Vivian looked smaller in her defendant's clothes, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She avoided Maya's eyes throughout the prosecutor's opening statement, staring instead at her hands folded in her lap. For a moment, Maya felt a flicker of the old sympathy, the familiar urge to protect and excuse and minimize. Then Martinez began presenting the evidence. The notebooks were damning, read aloud in Vivian's own words. The surveillance photos were worse. Images of Maya leaving work, going to dinner with James, even walking her neighbor's dog.
The jury's faces grew increasingly disturbed as the scoop of Vivian's obsession became clear. Derek's testimony was the hardest to watch. He spoke quietly about finding the materials in his mother's apartment, about her increasingly erratic behavior, about his failure to warn Maya despite knowing she was in danger. "I wanted to protect both of them," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought if I just stayed quiet, maybe Mom would get help on her own. Maybe she'd realize how wrong this was. I never thought it would go this far." Maya's testimony was scheduled for the second day. She had practiced with Martinez, had prepared herself mentally for the ordeal of describing months of surveillance and violation, but standing in the witness box, looking out at her aunt's defeated posture and her family's disapproving faces, the words felt heavier than she had expected.
Her relationship with her parents had shifted dramatically. Linda still called occasionally, but their conversations were strained and surface level, both women tiptoeing around the landmine of Vivian's imprisonment. Maya's father had stopped calling altogether, unable to reconcile his daughter's pursuit of justice with his understanding of family loyalty. "You've changed," Linda said during one awkward phone call. "You used to be more understanding, more willing to see everyone's perspective." "I'm still understanding, Mom. I just don't think understanding requires me to accept being stalked and harassed. I can understand that Vivian was struggling without agreeing that her struggles justified her actions." The conversation ended early, as they often did now. Maya had learned to recognize the moment when her mother's disappointment became palpable, when it became clear that Linda would never fully accept Maya's choice to protect herself rather than protect the family's image. But other relationships had deepened in unexpected ways. Derek, initially angry about his mother's conviction, had begun reaching out to Maya with tentative attempts at reconciliation. Their conversations were careful, bounded by the reality that his mother was in prison because of Maya's testimony, but they were also honest in ways family relationships rarely achieved. "I should have warned you," he said during a coffee meeting in neutral territory, a cafe neither of them had ever visited before. "I knew she was getting worse, knew she was obsessing over you, and I chose to protect her instead of protecting you. That was wrong." Maya stirred sugar into her latte, processing the apology she'd waited months to hear. "Why didn't you? Why didn't you tell me what was happening?" Derek was quiet for a long time, staring out the cafe window at the busy street beyond. "Because I was afraid of what would happen if I spoke up. I was afraid of confrontation, afraid of taking sides, afraid of making things worse. I thought if I just stayed quiet, maybe it would all blow over." "Like I used to do," Maya said quietly. "I understand the impulse. I spent years avoiding confrontation, trying to keep everyone happy. But staying quiet doesn't make problems go away. It just lets them get worse." Their relationship would never be the same as it had been before, but it was evolving into something more authentic, built on acknowledgement of harm rather than pretense of perfection. Derek was in therapy now, working through his own patterns of conflict avoidance and family dysfunction. Sometimes he shared insights from his sessions, observations about the toxic dynamics they'd all grown up accepting as normal. Emma had become Maya's closest family ally, the one person who consistently supported her decision to seek justice rather than reconciliation. She visited frequently from Portland, and their relationship had deepened beyond the superficial sisterly connection they'd maintained for years. "I'm proud of you," Emma said during one visit as they walked through the botanical gardens near Maya's new apartment. "I know that sounds weird, being proud of your older sister, but I am. You stood up for yourself when everyone else was telling you to sit down. That took incredible courage." Maya had started therapy too, working with a counselor who specialized in family trauma and boundary setting. Dr. Sarah Kim was a gentle woman in her 50s who helped Maya understand the patterns she'd been trapped in for decades, the role of family peacekeeper, the expectation that she absorb other people's dysfunction, the learned helplessness that came from years of being told her feelings mattered less than other people's comfort. You weren't responsible for managing your family's emotions.
Children often take on that role when the adults in their lives are struggling, but it's not developmentally appropriate and it's not sustainable into adulthood. The therapy helped Maya understand why the family's reaction to Vivian's conviction had been so devastating. It wasn't just about disappointment or disagreement. It was about the fundamental rejection of Maya's right to protect herself, the insistence that she continue playing a role that required her to sacrifice her own well-being for others' peace of mind.
They're grieving, Dr. Kim explained. They're grieving the loss of the family system where you absorbed all the conflict and dysfunction. Your refusal to play that role anymore means they have to face their own problems directly, and that's uncomfortable for them. Maya's work life had improved dramatically since the trial. Her colleagues at the hospital had been supportive throughout the legal proceedings, and her supervisor had even arranged for additional security in the staff parking areas. The incident had sparked conversations about workplace safety and domestic violence that led to new protocols for protecting employees who were experiencing harassment or stalking. She'd been promoted to senior nurse practitioner, a recognition of her clinical skills and leadership abilities that would have thrilled her a year ago. Now, while she was grateful for the professional advancement, she found herself less dependent on external validation. The trial had taught her that other people's opinions, even family members' opinions, didn't determine her worth or define her reality. James had been her anchor throughout the chaos, steady and supportive without trying to fix problems that weren't his. Their relationship had deepened through the crisis, built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than the people-pleasing patterns Maya had brought to previous relationships. "I love watching you take up space," he said one evening as they cooked dinner together in her new kitchen. "I love seeing you refuse to make yourself smaller for other people's comfort. It's like watching you become more yourself, if that makes sense." It did make sense. Maya felt more solid in her own skin, more confident in her right to exist without apology. The family's rejection still hurt. Probably always would, but it no longer felt like a reflection of her inadequacy. Instead, it felt like the inevitable consequence of refusing to participate in dysfunction. The legal proceedings had attracted media attention that surprised everyone involved. The case became a talking point in discussions about family abuse, psychological manipulation, and the cultural pressures that often prevent victims from seeking justice when their abusers are relatives. Maya declined most interview requests, but she did participate in one newspaper article about stalking within families. People assume that abuse from strangers is more dangerous than abuse from family members. But family abusers often have more access to their victims, more information about their routines and vulnerabilities, and more ability to manipulate the victim's support system. In some ways, it can be more dangerous precisely because it's harder to recognize and harder to escape. The article generated hundreds of comments from readers sharing their own stories of family abuse and the pressure they'd faced to keep it in the family, rather than seeking legal recourse. Maya realized her case had become part of a larger conversation about accountability, justice, and the courage required to prioritize safety over family loyalty. A year after the trial, Maya received an unexpected letter forwarded through her attorney. Vivian had written from prison. A 3-page letter that began with apologies and ended with requests for forgiveness and eventual reconciliation. Quote, "I was sick, I was drowning in my own problems, and I took it out on you. I know what I did was wrong, and I know I hurt you terribly. I'm getting help now, therapy, medication, anger management. I want to be better. I want to earn your forgiveness, even though I know I don't deserve it." Maya read the letter several times, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus manipulation. The apology seemed sincere, but it was followed by detailed explanations of Vivian's mental state, her difficult circumstances, her regret and shame. The letter asked for nothing concrete,
No dropped charges, no shortened sentence, but it created an emotional obligation, a pressure to respond with grace and understanding. Maya showed the letter to Dr. Kim during their next session. "What do you want to do?" Dr. Kim asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to write back to have some kind of resolution, but part of me thinks any response would just give her more access to me, more opportunity to manipulate my emotions."
You don't owe her a response, Dr. Kim said gently. Forgiveness isn't something she can earn from you. It's something you might choose to give or not give, on your own timeline, for your own reasons. Her rehabilitation and healing are her responsibility, not yours. Maya ultimately chose not to respond to the letter. She filed it away in a folder with other legal documents, acknowledging its existence without allowing it to create obligation or guilt. Vivian's journey toward healing was important, but it wasn't Maya's job to facilitate or validate that process. Instead, Maya focused on her own healing, her own growth, her own expanding sense of what was possible when she refused to shrink herself for other people's comfort. She started dating again, not seriously, but with a new confidence in her ability to recognize red flags and enforce boundaries. She traveled, took art classes, made new friends who knew nothing about her family drama, and valued her for who she was, rather than who they needed her to be. The 7-year restraining order created a boundary that would eventually expire, requiring Maya to make new decisions about safety and contact. But that was a future problem for a future version of herself, a woman who would undoubtedly be even stronger, even more confident in her right to exist without apology. For now, Maya focused on the present moment, on the life she was building from the ashes of family expectations and dysfunction. It was smaller in some ways, fewer family connections, fewer people who claimed to love her, but it was entirely her own, built on truth rather than peacekeeping, on authenticity rather than accommodation. She was learning to love this version of herself, the woman who had chosen justice over harmony and discovered that the sky hadn't fallen when she stopped holding it up. Derek had maintained sporadic contact over the years, updating Maya occasionally about his mother's progress in prison. Vivian was apparently doing well in the rehabilitation programs, had completed her GED, and was working toward a bachelor's degree in addiction counseling. She'd written several more letters that Derek forwarded through the attorney, but Maya had maintained her boundary about not responding directly. "She talks about you sometimes," Derek had said during their last coffee meeting. "Says she understands now why you did what you did. Says she's grateful, actually, that someone finally held her accountable." Maya had nodded politely, but privately she wondered if this new narrative, gratitude for consequences, was just another manipulation, another way of reframing Vivian's actions to make her the victim of her own dysfunction rather than the perpetrator of deliberate harm. It didn't matter, really. Vivian's story about her own growth and healing was Vivian's to tell, but it didn't create any obligation for Maya to participate in or validate that narrative. Maya's parents had gradually re-entered her life in limited ways. Linda called on holidays now, stilted conversations that touched on work and weather, while carefully avoiding any mention of the trial or its aftermath. Maya's father had sent a brief email on her 30th birthday, acknowledging the milestone without reference to their estrangement. The relationships were shadow versions of what they'd once been, but they existed, which felt like a small miracle given the devastation of the previous years. 5 years later, Maya was featured on the cover of Nursing Today magazine for her work developing protocols for documenting domestic violence in healthcare settings. The article discussed her personal experience with family abuse and how it had shaped her professional mission. She'd been hesitant to go public with her story, but the magazine's reach meant that hundreds of nurses would read about the importance of taking family violence seriously, of believing victims even when their abusers were respectable family members. The responses poured in. Emails from nurses who'd missed signs of family abuse in their own patients, from women who'd been stalked by relatives and pressured to work it out within the family, from adult children who'd finally found the courage to report abusive parents after reading Maya's story.
One email particularly moved her. It was from a young man whose sister had been stalked by their uncle, whose family had pressured her to drop charges to avoid embarrassing the family. "Reading your story gave her the courage to pursue the case," he wrote. "She'd been feeling guilty and selfish, but seeing someone else choose justice over family loyalty helped her understand that protecting yourself isn't betrayal, it's necessary." Maya printed that email and kept it in her desk drawer, a reminder that her choice to speak up had ripple effects beyond her own healing. James proposed on a quiet Tuesday evening while they were washing dishes together, a perfectly ordinary moment made extraordinary by the depth of love and commitment behind it. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony in their backyard, surrounded by chosen family: Emma, Dr. Kim, Zoe from nursing school, colleagues who'd become close friends, James's parents who'd embraced Maya without reservation. Notable absences included most of Maya's blood relatives, though Emma served as maid of honor, and Derek sent a thoughtful wedding gift with a note expressing his hope for Maya's happiness. The absence of her parents stung, but it didn't diminish the joy of the day. Maya had learned that family could be chosen as well as inherited, that love without manipulation was possible, that she could build a life based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. 7 years later, the restraining order expired on a gray February morning, unmarked by ceremony or notification. Maya only realized it because she'd marked the date on her calendar years earlier, curious to see how it would feel when the legal boundary disappeared. It felt like nothing at all. Vivian had been released from prison 8 months earlier and was living in a halfway house across town, working at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated women reintegrate into society. Derek had shared these details during one of their increasingly rare conversations, apparently hoping Maya would express interest in some form of reconciliation now that the legal barriers had been removed.
Maya felt no such interest. The absence of a restraining order didn't create any obligation to resume contact with someone who had stalked and harassed her. The legal boundary had never been what protected her. Her own clarity about what she would and wouldn't accept had been the real protection. She marked the date with a quiet celebration, taking herself out for lunch at a restaurant she'd never tried before. 7 years of safety, 7 years of growth, 7 years of learning to live without the constant hypervigilance that had characterized the months following the trial. She'd built a life she loved, surrounded herself with people who valued her authenticity over her compliance, created a career that channeled her trauma into purpose. Vivian's absence from that life was no longer a wound that needed healing. It was simply a fact, as neutral as the weather. 10 years later, Maya's first book, When Family Hurts, Recognizing and Responding to Domestic Abuse by Relatives, was published by a major university press. The book combined her personal story with research about family violence, practical guidance for healthcare workers, and resources for victims struggling with the unique challenges of seeking help when their abusers were family members. The book tour brought her to cities across the country, where she spoke to audiences of nurses, social workers, law enforcement officers, and survivors. The conversations were sometimes difficult. Many people still struggled with the idea that family loyalty had limits, that blood relationship didn't excuse abusive behavior, but they were also hopeful. Each speaking engagement reached people who needed permission to protect themselves, who needed to hear that choosing safety over harmony wasn't selfish or cruel. During a book signing in Denver, a middle-aged woman approached the table with tears in her eyes. "My daughter is being stalked by her brother," she said quietly. "I've been telling her to work it out with him, to not involve the police because it would destroy our family. But reading your book, I think I've been wrong. I think I've been protecting him instead of protecting her." Maya signed the woman's book with a message of encouragement, knowing that this conversation might be the turning point that saved her daughter years of continued abuse. These moments made all the difficult publicity, all the reopened wounds of sharing her story publicly, worthwhile. Emma had finished her doctorate and was now running a family therapy practice that specialized in abuse recovery. She'd developed a treatment model based partly on Maya's experience,
helping family members understand the difference between reconciliation and accountability, between forgiveness and continued vulnerability to harm. "You taught me that love doesn't require martyrdom," Emma said during the book launch party, "that protecting yourself doesn't make you selfish, and that healthy families can survive members being held accountable for their actions." Maya and James had been trying to start a family of their own, a process that brought up unexpected anxieties about generational patterns and inherited dysfunction. Maya found herself in therapy again, working through fears about passing on trauma, about her ability to create the kind of safe, honest family environment she'd never experienced as a child. "You get to break the cycle," Dr. Kim assured her. "You've already proven you can recognize dysfunction and refuse to participate in it. Those same skills will serve you as a parent." 15 years later, Maya watched her 5-year-old daughter Lily play in the backyard while she and James prepared dinner together. The domestic scene was everything she'd dreamed of during the dark years of family conflict. Peaceful, honest, built on mutual respect rather than power struggles and emotional manipulation. Lily knew about Aunt Vivian in age-appropriate terms, that Mommy had a relative who made bad choices and couldn't be part of their family anymore. The explanation satisfied Lily's
without burdening her with details she was too young to process. When she was older, Maya would share more of the story, would use her own experience to teach Lily about boundaries, consent, and the difference between family loyalty and enabling abuse. Maya had received occasional updates about Vivian over the years through Derek, who maintained minimal contact with his mother while building his own recovery from the toxic family patterns they'd both inherited. Vivian had completed her bachelor's degree, had been promoted to supervisor at the nonprofit, had been sober for 6 years. She'd apparently started a support group for women who'd lost family relationships due to their own abusive behavior. "She says she understands now why you couldn't forgive her," Derek had reported during their last conversation. "Says she's learned the difference between earning forgiveness and demanding it." Maya felt glad to hear about Vivian's progress without feeling any obligation to participate in or validate it. Vivian's healing journey was important, but it existed separately from Maya's life. The two narratives, victim and perpetrator, recovery could both be true without requiring intersection or reconciliation. Maya's second book, focusing on intergenerational trauma and breaking cycles of family dysfunction, was due to her publisher the following year. This book was more personal, exploring her journey from people pleaser to self-advocate, from family peacekeeper to boundary setter. It included chapters on parenting after abuse, choosing chosen family over biological family, and the ongoing work of healing from complex trauma. The writing process had been cathartic and difficult, requiring her to revisit painful memories while also celebrating how far she had traveled from the frightened young woman who'd stood in that parking garage 15 years earlier. That woman had been brave enough to call the police, brave enough to pursue justice even when her entire family opposed her. But she'd still been operating from a place of reactive trauma, still learning that she deserved protection and safety. The woman writing the book was different, confident in her worth, clear about her boundaries, surrounded by relationships built on authenticity rather than accommodation. She'd learned to trust her instincts, to prioritize her well-being without guilt, to love people without requiring herself to absorb their dysfunction. 20 years later, Maya stood in her home office, now converted from what had once been Lily's nursery, looking out at the garden where her teenage daughter was reading under the apple tree they'd planted when Lily was 7. At 15, Lily was everything Maya had hoped to raise: confident without being entitled, kind without being compliant, capable of both setting boundaries and respecting them. They'd had conversations about difficult family dynamics that Maya could never have imagined having with her own parents. When Lily's best friend was struggling with an emotionally abusive mother, Maya had helped her understand the difference between supporting a friend and trying to fix unfixable family situations. "You can't save people from their own families," Maya had explained, "but you can be a safe person for your friend to talk to, and you can help her find adults who can actually intervene." It was a lesson Maya had learned too late for her own childhood,
but just in time to pass on to the next generation. Maya's work had evolved beyond individual patient care into policy advocacy and systemic change. She'd served on committees that developed statewide protocols for identifying and responding to family violence, had testified before legislative committees about the unique challenges faced by victims of relative abuse, and had helped draft laws that expanded stalking definitions to include digital surveillance and psychological intimidation. The work felt like a natural extension of everything she'd learned from her own experience. That individual healing was important, but incomplete without addressing the systems that enabled abuse to flourish. She'd learned to think beyond her own case, to the thousands of other victims who faced similar choices between family loyalty and personal safety. James had been diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer the previous year, a health scare that had reminded them both of life's fragility and preciousness. The treatment had been successful, but the experience had deepened their appreciation for the life they'd built together. The honesty, the mutual support, the absence of drama and manipulation that had characterized Maya's family of origin.
"I'm grateful we found each other," James had said during one of the long hospital waiting room conversations that had punctuated his treatment. "I'm grateful you learned to trust that love doesn't have to hurt." Maya had learned that lesson well enough to pass it on. Lily was growing up with examples of healthy relationships, with models of conflict resolution that didn't require anyone to absorb abuse or sacrifice authenticity for peace. She was learning that she deserved to be loved for who she was, not for how well she managed other people's emotions. Emma had grandchildren now, 2 little boys who called Maya Aunt Maya and knew nothing about the family dysfunction that had shaped their parents' childhoods. The next generation was growing up with different models, different expectations, different possibilities for what family could be when it was built on respect rather than obligation. Derek had maintained his sobriety and had married a woman who understood his family history without requiring him to fix relationships that had been broken long before they met. He'd stopped updating Maya about Vivian years earlier, apparently understanding that Maya's healing didn't require knowledge of or involvement in Vivian's journey. The silence between them wasn't hostile, it was simply complete. 2 people who had shared genetics and geography, but had chosen different paths when faced with the consequences of toxic family dynamics. Maya felt no anger toward Vivian anymore, but also no curiosity about her current life. The chapter was closed, the book finished, the story complete. Maya's 3rd book, a memoir about building chosen family after surviving biological family trauma, had become a bestseller and was being adapted into a documentary film. The media attention was sometimes overwhelming, but it also created opportunities to reach people who needed to hear that leaving toxic family members behind wasn't failure, it was success. During a recent interview, a journalist had asked Maya if she ever regretted pursuing charges against her aunt, if she ever wondered what might have happened if she'd chosen reconciliation over justice. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that someone I loved chose to hurt me rather than address her own pain in healthy ways. But I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret insisting that love requires respect, that family membership doesn't excuse abusive behavior. Those boundaries saved my life, and they've allowed me to create the kind of family I want to pass on to my daughter." In the front row, she spotted Dr. Kim, now in her 70s, but still attending conferences and supporting Maya's work. Next to her sat Emma, whose own research on intergenerational trauma had gained international recognition. James was there too, his presence as steady and supportive as it had been for over 2 decades. Maya clicked to the next slide, showing statistics about family violence that most people still found shocking. 80% of stalking cases involve someone known to the victim. 40% involve family members. Yet we're still more likely to question victims when their abusers are relatives. Still more likely to suggest reconciliation rather than accountability. She thought about Lily, now 20 and studying social justice at college, who had grown up understanding these concepts as naturally as she understood gravity. Lily had never questioned her right to set boundaries, never struggled with the idea that love and respect were inseparable.
She was part of a generation that might finally break the cycles that had persisted for centuries. Recovery from family abuse isn't just individual, it's generational, Maya explained. When we choose accountability over enablement, when we prioritize safety over false peace, we change not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone who comes after us. During the question and answer session, a young social worker stood up, her voice trembling slightly. Dr. Chen, my brother has been emotionally abusing his children, and my parents keep saying we need to support him through his difficulties rather than reporting to child services. How do I handle family pressure to stay silent? Maya felt the familiar ache of recognition. 25 years later, the same patterns persisted. Families protecting abusers, victims being blamed for disrupting harmony, children being sacrificed to preserve adult comfort. You handle it by remembering that love doesn't require you to enable harm, Maya answered. You handle it by understanding that those children deserve protection more than your brother deserves protection from consequences. You handle it by choosing courage over compliance, even when compliance feels easier. The young woman nodded, tears in her eyes, and Maya saw herself 25 years earlier. Terrified, alone, convinced she was betraying everyone she loved by insisting on basic safety and respect. After the conference, Maya, Emma, and Dr. Kim went to dinner at a quiet restaurant near the convention center. They'd maintained this tradition for 15 years, gathering whenever their professional paths crossed to reflect on how far they'd all come. I keep thinking about that young social worker, Emma said over dessert. She reminded me so much of us back then, so afraid of causing problems, so convinced that we were responsible for other people's reactions to our boundaries. Dr. Kim smiled, cutting into her tiramisu. Maya, do you remember our early sessions? You kept apologizing for taking up time, for having problems that weren't real emergencies. You thought family dysfunction was just something you had to endure. Maya laughed, though the memory still carried traces of old pain. I thought therapy was for people with real problems. I thought being stalked by my aunt was just a family disagreement that had gotten out of hand. I had no framework for understanding that psychological warfare was still warfare. And now you've helped create that framework for thousands of other people, Emma added. Your work has literally changed how we identify and respond to family violence. It was true. Maya's research and advocacy had influenced policy changes in 12 states, had been cited in court cases involving family stalking, had been translated into 7 languages for international use. But the work that felt most meaningful was the individual conversations, the emails from readers who'd found courage to leave abusive families, the healthcare workers who'd learned to recognize signs they'd previously missed, the parents who'd broken generational cycles of dysfunction. 3 months later, Maya received a letter that surprised her. It came through her publisher, forwarded from someone who'd read her latest book. The return address showed it was from a women's correctional facility in a different state.
The letter was from Vivian. Maya stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. 25 years of no contact, and now this, a communication that arrived not as manipulation or demand, but as what appeared to be a simple acknowledgement. Dear Maya, the letter began, written in handwriting that was still recognizable despite the passage of years. I hope this letter finds you well and happy. I've been following your career through news articles and your books, and I want you to know how proud I am of the work you're doing. Maya read carefully, looking for hidden manipulation, for requests or demands, for the emotional hooks that had characterized Vivian's communications decades earlier. Instead, she found something that seemed genuine. I am writing not to ask for anything, but to acknowledge something I should have acknowledged 25 years ago. You were right to press charges against me. You were right to refuse to accept my behavior. You were right to prioritize your safety over family expectations. I was deeply sick, deeply angry, and deeply wrong. The letter went on to describe Vivian's journey through prison, addiction recovery, therapy, and education. She'd completed a bachelor's degree in addiction counseling and was working with other incarcerated women who'd committed crimes against family members. She'd been sober for 12 years, had completed extensive therapy for the personality disorders that had driven her obsessive behavior. I understand now that forgiveness isn't something I can earn from you. Forgiveness is a gift you might choose to give yourself for your own healing if and when it serves your well-being. I don't need or expect a response to this letter. I simply wanted you to know that the woman who hurt you has taken full responsibility for that harm, and that your courage in pursuing justice probably saved other people from becoming my victims. Maya read the letter 3 times, then set it aside to process. After 25 years of silence, Vivian's words carried a strange weight. Not the weight of obligation or guilt, but the weight of complete acknowledgement. There were no excuses, no requests for reconciliation, no subtle manipulation designed to create emotional debt. That evening, Maya shared the letter with James and Lily. Her daughter, now a junior in college studying criminal justice, read it with the analytical eye of someone who'd grown up understanding the dynamics of abuse and recovery. It sounds like she's actually done the work, like she's taken real responsibility instead of just going through the motions. Does that change anything for you? James asked gently. Maya considered the question. Did Vivian's apparent transformation, her acknowledgement of harm, her respect for boundaries, change anything about Maya's choices or her current life? I think it confirms that I made the right decision, not just the decision to press charges, but the decision to maintain no contact even after her release. She needed to do this work without expecting anything from me, without my participation or validation. The fact that she's apparently succeeded proves that accountability can lead to real change, but it doesn't create any obligation for reconciliation. Maya filed the letter with her other legal documents from the case, evidence of a chapter that was complete, a story that had reached its natural conclusion. Vivian's healing was important and valid, but it existed separately from Maya's life, just as it should. 6 months later, Maya was invited to speak at the United Nations about family violence as a global human rights issue. Standing before delegates from around the world, she shared statistics and policy recommendations, but she also shared the personal story that had started her journey from victim to advocate. When we protect abusers to preserve family unity, we teach children that love requires accepting harm. When we demand forgiveness without accountability, we perpetuate cycles of violence that span generations. When we prioritize reputation over safety, we sacrifice the vulnerable to protect the powerful.
The speech was live-streamed around the world, reaching millions of viewers. Maya's inbox filled with messages from survivors who'd found courage in her words, from professionals who'd been inspired to change their approaches, from family members who'd finally understood that enabling abuse wasn't love. One message particularly moved her. It was from Derek, who she hadn't heard from in several years. "I watched your UN speech," he wrote. "I wanted you to know that Mom watched it too. She's been out of prison for 15 years now, working as a counselor for women who've hurt their families. When your speech ended," she said, "she saved so many people by refusing to save me. I thought you should know that your courage 25 years ago is still rippling outward." Maya smiled, forwarding the message to Emma and Dr. Kim. The ripples were indeed spreading through her books, her speaking, her policy work, but most importantly, through the people who'd found permission in her story to protect themselves, to break cycles, to choose healing over enabling. On her 52nd birthday, Maya woke up in the home she and James had built together, surrounded by photos of Lily's college achievements, her own professional honors, family vacations with Emma and her children, quiet moments with the chosen family that had replaced the toxic dynamics of her childhood. She thought about the terrified young nurse who'd stood in that parking garage 26 years earlier, staring at the hateful words carved into her car. That woman had been brave enough to call for help, but she'd still been trapped in patterns of people-pleasing and family obligation that had nearly destroyed her. The woman who woke up that morning was different, solid in her sense of self, clear about her boundaries,
surrounded by relationships built on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. She'd learned that love without respect wasn't love at all, that family loyalty had limits, that protecting yourself wasn't selfish but necessary. Most importantly, she'd learned that healing was possible, that cycles could be broken, that courage could be cultivated even in the most unlikely circumstances. The frightened nurse had become an international advocate. The family peacekeeper had become a boundary-setting expert. The victim had become a voice for countless others who needed permission to choose safety over silence. As Maya prepared for another day of work, she was developing a new training program for healthcare workers. She felt grateful for the journey that had brought her here. The trauma had been real, the pain had been devastating, the family losses had been profound. But from that foundation of destruction, she'd built something beautiful. A life based on truth, relationships grounded in respect, work that channeled pain into purpose. The parking garage incident ended one version of Maya's life and began another. 26 years later, she could say with certainty that choosing justice over family loyalty, accountability over peace, healing over enabling had been the most difficult and most important decision of her life. It had cost her the family she'd been born into, but it had given her the family she'd chosen and the strength to help others make similar choices. The price had been high, but the reward? A life lived with integrity, surrounded by authentic love, had been immeasurable. That evening, as Maya and James prepared dinner while Lily called from college to share news about her criminal justice internship, Maya felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a life lived in alignment with one's values. She'd learned to love herself enough to demand respect, to trust herself enough to enforce boundaries, to believe in herself enough to keep growing, even when growth required leaving familiar dysfunction behind. The woman who'd been afraid to upset family dynamics had become someone who specialized in disrupting toxic systems. The nurse who'd learned to heal physical wounds had discovered how to heal generational trauma. The daughter who'd absorbed other people's dysfunction had raised a daughter who understood that love and respect were inseparable. Maya's story had become part of a larger narrative about courage, accountability, and the revolutionary power of choosing healing over enabling. Every person who read her books, attended her lectures, or found inspiration in her journey was writing their own chapter in that ongoing story. The story of humans learning to love without harming, to support without enabling, to build families based on respect rather than obligation.
As the sun set over the garden where she and James had planted roots, both literal and metaphorical, Maya felt the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into the foundation for helping countless others. She'd learned that trauma could be a teacher, that survival could become service, that the decision to protect yourself could ripple outward to protect generations yet to come. The camera in that parking garage had captured 13 minutes of destruction. Maya's response to those 13 minutes had created decades of healing, change, and hope. She'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses, that sometimes the most family-preserving action is holding family members accountable for their choices. Most of all, she'd learned that you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, and that teaching others this lesson might be the most important work of all.